My name is Serena Calloway, and I have been swallowing knives for 6 years and calling it marriage. The Calloway family, old money, Newport Beach, the kind of people who donate wings to hospitals and name them after themselves. They took me in like a stray and spent every single day after that reminding me I was one. My husband, Marcus Calloway, VP of something important at his father's firm, met me at a charity gala where I was working the check-in table and he was writing a check with too many zeros to fit on the line. He said I was the most beautiful woman in the room. I said thank you. He said he was going to marry me. I laughed. He didn't. 6 months later, I had a ring on my finger, a prenup I barely read, and a new last name that his mother, Diane Calloway, said I hadn't earned. I still remember what Diane said to me on my wedding day. She pulled me aside in the bridal suite, tilted her champagne flute toward me like a toast, and said, "You're decorative, Serena. Don't mistake that for permanent." I smiled. I filed it. I waited. Because here's what the Calloways never understood about a woman who grew up with nothing. She keeps receipts. She keeps every single one. The baby shower was Vivian Calloway, Marcus's younger sister, 28, Stanford MBA, engaged to a hedge fund manager named Colton, who laughed too loud at his own jokes. Vivian was 6 months pregnant and glowing in the way that only women who have never been truly afraid glow. The shower was held at Diane's Laguna Beach estate, the one with the infinity pool that vanishes into the Pacific, white roses everywhere, catered by some French chef Diane flew in from New York because apparently Los Angeles chefs weren't sufficient for the occasion. I sat in the third row of women arranged in a loose horseshoe around Vivian. I wore a cream silk blouse and tailored ivory trousers, and I had done my hair the way Marcus liked, curled and pinned back, because that was still the kind of woman I was performing that day. Beside me sat my daughter from my first relationship, Zoe, 10 years old, dark eyes, sharp jaw, already too perceptive for her own good. She had Marcus's last name because he legally adopted her 2 years into the marriage. He'd wanted that. He'd wanted to own everything I came with. Zoe was holding a small wrapped box in her lap. She had asked me 2 days before if she could make a gift for the baby. I'd said yes. She'd disappeared into her room for an afternoon and come out with something wrapped in white paper and a yellow ribbon and refused to tell me what was inside. She said, "Mom, just trust me. Dad said to wait until everyone was watching." I had stared at her. Dad? She meant Marcus. Marcus, who had been sleeping in the guest room for 4 months. Marcus, who had stopped looking at me the way he used to and started looking at me like you look at a clock on the wall, present, registered, and entirely unremarkable. Marcus, who had been texting someone named R. Chen at 2 a.m. and deleting the messages and not knowing I had already screenshotted everything. I smiled at Zoe. Let me tell you what was in the box. Zoe, my 10-year-old daughter, had made what she called a memory book for the baby. 40 pages. She'd spent weeks on it, which meant she'd been working on it before she ever asked me for permission, which meant she already knew. Kids who grow up in complicated households develop antennae the rest of us never do. She had made a scrapbook, baby photos, family photos, sweet little drawings, and in the back, tucked under a flap decorated with a crayon sun, was a single photograph. Printed at the Walgreens on PCH, 4x6. Clear as morning, Marcus Calloway and a woman named Rachel Chen on the back patio of our house, the Calloway estate in Corona del Mar that Diane had gifted to Marcus on our 3rd anniversary, standing very close together in a way that had nothing to do with friendship. Rachel's hand on Marcus's chest, Marcus's forehead dropped against Rachel's temple. The image timestamp in the corner read 14 months ago. The image was pulled from the security camera footage that Zoe, my perceptive, quiet, furious daughter, had apparently accessed from the home system iPad that Marcus never bothered to password protect because he never imagined a 10-year-old would be paying attention. but she was. She had always been paying attention, and tucked beneath the photograph, one page, printed in Zoe's neat handwriting because she'd asked me to help her spell the words correctly 2 weeks ago, and I had done it without asking why, was a letter addressed to Diane Calloway specifically. It read, "Dear Grandma Diane, you always say our family is about legacy. I made this book so the new baby knows about real legacy. I included something important. I thought everyone should see it at the same time. That felt fair. Love, Zoe." The room was so quiet I could hear the ocean. Diane's champagne flute landed on the side table with a sound like a small gun going off. Vivian was holding the photograph. Her mouth was open. She had gone the color of the white roses on the table behind her. Marcus was standing near the French doors to the patio. He'd slipped in late, 20 minutes ago, and positioned himself at the edge of the room the way he always did, contained and composed and managing the room with his presence. I watched him understand what was happening in real time. I watched the composure dissolve. I watched Marcus Calloway, the man who had once told me I should be grateful he chose me, understand that his 10-year-old daughter had just ended him in front of 40 of his family's closest friends. His Aunt Renata actually gasped. The woman beside her said quietly, "Oh my God." Diane turned to look at Marcus, and the look on her face, this woman who had been the architect of my humiliation for 6 years, who had said I was decorative, who had laughed at the idea of me, the look on her face was not anger, it was something worse. It was the face of a woman who has organized her entire life around maintaining a particular image and is watching it fall. I stood up. I smoothed my ivory trousers, and I picked up my glass of sparkling water, and I walked to where Zoe was standing, still calm, still straight, and I put my arm around her shoulders, and I said to the room, to all of it, the roses, the catered food, the women with their hyphenated names, I said nothing. I didn't have to. Zoe had already said everything. Here is what you need to understand about how we got here. It started with a woman named Rachel Chen, 32, architect, partner at a firm downtown. I had met Rachel twice, once at a Calloway Foundation fundraiser, once at a dinner at the house. She was beautiful, which I had noticed, and interesting, which I had also noticed, and the way Marcus looked at her, which I had absolutely noticed, and filed and said nothing about because I had learned that in this family, observation is power, and silence is strategy. It started 8 months before the shower when I found the texts. Not because I was snooping, I was genuinely looking for the grocery list Marcus had said he'd sent to his phone, and instead I found a thread with R. Chen that was not about architecture. I did not throw his phone. I did not confront him. I did not cry in front of him. I took a screenshot and I called my attorney, a woman named Blake O'Coffer, who practices family law out of an office in Brentwood and has a reputation in this city for being the person you call when the other person has more money and you have more truth. Blake is 45, drives a black Porsche, and has never lost a case she chose to take. She took mine in 48 hours. For 8 months, I gathered every text, screenshotted and timestamped and stored on a private cloud account on a secondary phone Blake's office set up for me. Every receipt photographed. 3 instances of Marcus making financial decisions affecting our joint accounts without my signature. Documented. The house, which Diane had gifted to Marcus, but which I had discovered after Blake spent 2 hours with a title search, was technically a marital asset under California community property law because Marcus had never properly structured the transfer before our marriage, a mistake Diane's attorneys had made because they'd been in a hurry and assumed I would never hire someone like Blake. Blake had smiled when she told me that. She said, "Serena, they underestimated you at every single step." I said, "I know." She said, "That was their catastrophic mistake." I said, "I know that too." Here's the thing about the Calloways. Their power was performative. It existed because people believed in it, because no one had ever looked directly at it and said, actually, let's examine the wiring. Because every woman who came through that family and felt the specific, grinding humiliation of being made to feel less than had either left quietly or stayed quietly, and neither option ever cost the Callaways anything. I was not going to be a quiet option. But I was also not going to be loud in the wrong moment. This is what women who grew up without power understand, that women who were born with it don't. Timing is everything. You don't flip the table when they're watching. You flip it when the room is full and the lighting is perfect and there is absolutely nowhere for anyone to look except directly at the truth. Diane had arranged the seating for that baby shower herself. She'd made sure every important person was there. She'd wanted a full room. She'd wanted witnesses to her family's magnificence. She got witnesses. After the photograph was passed around, and it was passed around, because people could not help themselves, because 40 women in a room with a bombshell and no phones being confiscated meant that thing was seen. The room started to fracture. Colton, Vivian's fiancé, went very still in the corner. He wasn't a Callaway by blood. He didn't have the survival instinct they'd built over generations. He just stood there looking at Marcus with an expression that said he was rapidly recalculating several things about this family. Marcus crossed the room toward me. I watched him come. He was using the walk, the deliberate, controlled stride that in our marriage had always meant he was about to reframe something, redirect, manage the narrative. He was going to be calm. He was going to use his voice the way his family used their money, as a tool to rearrange reality. He got within 4 feet of me and said, quietly, "Serena, I think we need to." I said, "Blake Okafor filed the paperwork 3 days ago." He stopped. I said, "The petition for divorce is already in the system. The motion regarding the Corona Del Mar property is attached. I thought you'd want to know before the weekend." He looked at me, and I looked at him, and for 1 second, one bare, unguarded second, the composure cracked, and I saw what was underneath it. Not remorse, not love, just the very specific shock of a man who thought he was holding all the cards, discovering that the deck had been in someone else's hands the entire time. I turned back to Zoe. I crouched down to her height, right there in the middle of the room, in front of everyone. I held her face in my hands. I said, "That was brave." She said, "You told me brave doesn't have to be loud." I said, "Yeah, baby, I did." She said, "Was I right?" I looked around the room, at Diane, still frozen by the gift table, at Vivian, who had set the photograph down but couldn't quite look away from it, at Renata and the 40 women and the French chef and the white roses and the infinity pool vanishing into the Pacific. I said, "You were absolutely right." The drive home was quiet in the best way. Zoe had her window down and her elbow on the door, and she was watching the coast go by, and I could see in the way her shoulders had dropped, all that held tension gone, that she had been carrying this longer than I knew, long enough that setting it down felt physical. I said, "Zoe, how long have you known?" She said, "About the lady?" I said, "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Since last Christmas, I saw his phone. I didn't know what it meant at first, then I kind of did." I gripped the steering wheel. I said, "I'm sorry you had to carry that." She said, "I wanted to do something, but I didn't know how." She looked at me. Then I heard what Grandma Diane said at the shower last year, about you, about how you didn't deserve the house. I heard her on the phone. She was telling someone she said you were the help that got lucky. The rage that moved through me was clean. That is the only word for it. Clean and cold and completely silent. I said, "You heard all of that?" She said, "I hear everything, Mom." I said, "I know you do." She turned back to the window. After a minute, she said, "I just wanted people to know the truth, like the whole truth, not the Callaway version of it." I said, They know it now. She said, "Was it okay that I did it like that? In front of everyone?" I thought about it, genuinely thought about it, and I said, "Blake made that comment about hoping the baby doesn't look like its mother. She said it in front of 40 people. She said it in front of you. So, yes, Zoe, it was okay." Zoe nodded. She looked satisfied. Not vindictive. 10-year-olds are not vindictive. They are just relentlessly honest in ways adults train themselves out of. Just satisfied. The satisfaction of a person who did the right thing at the right time and knows it. 3 weeks later, Blake called me. She said, "They want to settle." I said, "Of course they do." She said, "Diane personally called my office this morning. She wants to discuss terms privately, outside of mediation." I said, "What did you tell her?" Blake said, "I told her that private discussions would need to go through me and that my client was not available for informal conversations." I said, "Good." Blake said, "She left a message for you. You want to hear it?" I said, "Yes." Blake read it. "Diane Calloway says she would like to speak with you woman to woman and hopes that the situation can be resolved without further disruption to the family." I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Tell her the only conversation I'm interested in having is the one where she signs the document acknowledging the asset agreement her attorneys failed to structure correctly, contributes to Zoe's trust fund as outlined in our petition, and issues a formal written apology to be witnessed by both our counsel." Blake laughed. It was a real laugh, not a professional one. She said, "Done." The apology came 6 weeks later. It was 4 sentences. It was written on Diane's personal stationery, the cream monogrammed kind she ordered from a printer in London, and it was witnessed by both attorneys, and it was, therefore, a legal document. It sat in the file folder in Blake's office, and a copy sat in mine. 4 sentences in Diane Calloway's handwriting. I acknowledge that I have made comments towards Serena Calloway that were unkind, dismissive, and unwarranted. These comments do not reflect appropriate behavior, and I regret the impact they had. I extend my sincere apologies to Serena and to Zoe. I wish them well. Not effusive, not warm, but legal, documented, and real. Diane Calloway had been made to sign her own acknowledgement of what she'd done to me and have it witnessed by attorneys and stored in a file that would live forever. For a woman whose entire identity was about image and control, there is no punishment more precise. The settlement was signed on a Tuesday in October. I kept the house. Zoe's education trust was funded at the level Blake had specified, substantial enough to mean she would never need anyone the way I'd needed Marcus, and the terms included a provision that neither Marcus nor any Calloway family member could make public statements disparaging either of us, because Blake had included a mutual non-disparagement clause, and Marcus's attorneys, tired and outmaneuvered, and apparently also tired of Marcus, had let it go through. Marcus moved into a rental in Newport. Rachel Chen, I was told by someone who still talked to Vivian, had ended things with him 2 months after the shower. Apparently the photograph had made the rounds in ways that extended beyond the baby shower room, and Rachel had apparently been under the impression that Marcus's marriage was more over than it was, and when the reality of what had actually been happening became clear, she had walked. I felt nothing about that. Not satisfaction, not sympathy. Just the flat, clean neutrality of someone who has released the weight of another person's story. Vivian had her baby, a girl, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, born in November. I sent flowers because Zoe asked me to, and because the baby was innocent of all of it. The card said congratulations, and I signed it Serena and Zoe and left it at that. Colton, I heard, asked some pointed questions about the Calloway family finances in the months after the shower, and pushed the wedding date back. As of the last information I had, they were still engaged, but the date had moved twice. That was between Vivian and Colton, and I had no investment in it either way. I went back to work. This is the part of the story that women in my position don't always get to have, the after, the what I did with it. So I want to be precise about it. Before Marcus, I had been in event production, small scale, corporate events, private parties, the kind of work that is invisible until it isn't, until the thing you organized runs perfectly and someone says, "Wow, this is incredible," and you stand in the back and know that you built it. I had stopped when Zoe was born, and then Marcus had made it easy and comfortable to not go back, and I had let easy and comfortable become a cage I didn't name until it was locked. I called my old manager, a woman named Dana Reyes, who ran her own firm out of Silver Lake. Dana had texted me twice in the past 3 years asking if I was ever coming back. I had never replied. I replied now. Dana said, "Serena, finally." I said, "I know, I'm sorry." She said, "Don't apologize, just come in Monday." I went in Monday. By February, I was managing a full calendar of events. By June, I was a partner. By the following fall, Dana and I had expanded the firm to include a team of 12 and a client list that included 3 Fortune 500 companies and a luxury resort chain that wanted us to design their entire annual event program. The work was not glamorous in the way the Callaway world was glamorous. It was real. It required my actual brain, my actual instincts, the actual skills I had spent 6 years not using. And every single day I went to work and built something that was mine, entirely mine. Not a name I'd borrowed, or a house I'd been gifted, or a seat at a table someone else owned. Felt like breathing correctly for the first time in a very long time. Zoe started 6th grade that September. She joined the school debate team because, she told me, she liked winning arguments with facts. I tried not to laugh. I didn't entirely succeed. She also asked me one evening at dinner the question I had been half expecting and half dreading. She said, "Mom, do you think I was mean at the shower?" I put down my fork. I said, "What makes you ask that?" She said, "Emma at school said she heard from her mom that what I did was cruel." I was quiet for a moment. I said, "Zoe, what Grandma Diane said about hoping the baby doesn't look like her mom, that was cruel. What Vivian has said about me in front of you over the years, some of that was cruel. What your dad did was cruel. And nobody at that shower called any of that out, not once." I looked at her. "You brought the truth into a room full of people who had been comfortable with lies. That's not the same as cruel." She thought about it. She said, "But the photograph was private." I said, "The surveillance camera footage was from our house, our property, your home, and your father's choices affected your life directly. You chose to share it. That's different from cruelty." She said, "I think I'd do it again." I said, "I think you should trust your own judgment on that." She said, "You're not going to tell me if I was right." I said, "I think you already know." She picked her fork back up. She said, "Yeah, I do." The last time I saw Diane Callaway was at a gallery opening in November. She was there with 2 of her charity board women. I was there with Dana and a client we were celebrating. Diane saw me across the room, and I watched the calculation happen on her face, the brief inventory of options, the weighing of how to handle it, whether to approach or retreat or perform. She approached. She was wearing a pale blue dress that cost more than most people's rent, and her hair was immaculate, and she looked exactly as she had always looked, controlled, composed, impenetrable. She said, "Serena." I said, "Diane." She said, "You look well." I said, "I am well." A pause, the kind that has whole conversations inside it. She said, "Zoe is..." She stopped, started again. "She's a remarkable child." I said, "Yes, she is." She said, "She has your spine." It was the most honest thing Diane Callaway had ever said to me, possibly the most honest thing she was capable of saying. I looked at her. I said, "That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me." She held my gaze for 1 second, and in that second, I saw something shift. Not warmth, not apology. Diane Callaway did not do warmth or apology outside of legally witnessed documents, but something like recognition, like the look of a chess player acknowledging, finally, that the other person was actually playing. She gave a small, tight nod. I gave one back. She walked back to her side of the room, and I walked back to mine, and that was the end of Diane Calloway as a relevant force in my life. Here is what I know now that I did not know at 26 when I walked into that charity gala and took a check from a man who would spend the next 6 years reminding me of it. I know that power handed to you is always conditional. The person who hands it can take it back, and will, the moment you stop being useful or decorative or silent. The only power that cannot be taken is the power you built. I know that women in wealthy families are often the most skilled at cruelty because they have had the most time and the most resources to refine it. They have learned to make it graceful, to make it look like wit, to deliver it at a baby shower in front of 40 women with champagne glasses and call it humor. I know that children who grow up watching their mothers be diminished either learn to accept diminishment as normal, or they develop a profound, incandescent intolerance for injustice. I got lucky. Zoe got furious in the right direction. I know that revenge doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be messy. It doesn't have to cost you your dignity or your grace or your sleep. The best revenge I know is a closed file in a lawyer's office in Brentwood, a house with my name on the deed, a company with my name in the partnership, and a 10-year-old who stands up in rooms full of powerful people and says, calmly, clearly, and without apology, exactly what is true. The best revenge is a life they assumed you couldn't build. I built it. Zoe asked me last week if we could get a dog. I said yes immediately, which I never do. I usually say, let me think about it, let me consider it, let me weigh the options the way I weigh everything, carefully and quietly and with a plan. But she asked, and I said yes without hesitating, and she looked so surprised that she made me laugh, really laugh, the kind that starts in the chest. She said, really? Just yes? I said, yeah, baby, just yes. She said, what kind? I said, you pick. She said, can I name it? I said, you pick the dog and the name and where it sleeps and what it eats. It's your dog. She thought about this for a very long moment, this child who had grown up in a house where her mother spent years performing smallness so other people could feel large. And then she said, I want it to sleep on my bed. I said, done. She said, and I want it to be big, not a lap dog, big and loud and kind of messy. I said, big, loud, and messy. Perfect. She said, and I want to name her something powerful. I said, what were you thinking? She thought about it one more second and then she smiled, my daughter's smile, the one that is nothing like her father's and everything like mine, and she said, Diane. I looked at her. She looked back at me, completely innocent, completely straight-faced. And then we both started laughing and we could not stop. My name is Serena Calloway, though I have filed to restore my birth name, Serena Cole, and the paperwork is moving through the system, and by spring it will be complete. I sat in the third row of a baby shower and I did not react when a woman insulted me in front of 40 people because I had learned to be invisible. But my daughter stood up, and everything that came after, every document signed and every asset recovered, and every morning I woke up in my own house with my own name coming back to me piece by piece, all of it started with a 10-year-old in a white dress with yellow daisies who decided that enough was enough and the room was full and it was exactly the right time. She gave the baby a gift. She gave me my life back. And somewhere in Laguna Beach, in an estate with an infinity pool that vanishes into the Pacific, a woman named Diane Calloway sits with a copy of a legal document in her dress drawer that says, in her own handwriting, witnessed by attorneys, I was wrong. That document exists. It will always exist. And every single day that it sits in that drawer is a day I win.